I'll start that over. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call the Tuesday, February 18th meeting of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to order. I'll be looking for a motion to approve the agenda.
As amended.
As amended?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Item number 3, we have some past minutes for approval. Is there any commentary on the December 17th? Hearing none. January 21st? Hearing none, I'll look for a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Item number 4, a mortgage for application, closing cost assistance program of 17 Clarendon. So this is a cleanup of a past approval. Tucker, can... Oh, I'm out of order, excuse me. Let's have the 3 Friendship application.
I'm not used to working with the electronic copy.
Okay, is the applicant here? Is there any commentary, questions? This is the Torme application.
It's just land, right? Is that
It is.
right? Okay, yeah.
It's land and it's covenant, right?
Any further discussion on it? Look for a motion.
I move to grant up to $15,000 for closing cost assistance for this property, subject to return of any balance, unused balance.
Is there a second?
Second,
All those in favor?
give it to Penny.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Carries unanimously. Okay.
So 17 Clarendon is a cleanup, as you mentioned. It was simply the registry had recorded our lien ahead of the primary lender, and so this is rectifying that situation, although sort of nice being in first position.
It is nice being in first position.
Yes, but I'm sure the lender probably is not appreciative.
So we'll be looking for a motion to refile the,
I'll make a motion to authorize the chair to sign documents related to the subordination on behalf of the trust.
We should first approve the subordination.
Okay. I'll make a motion to approve the subordination.
all those in favor?
I'll second.
For a second, thank you. All those in favor?
Seconded?
Brooke?
Aye.
Aye. Carries unanimously.
And then I'll make a second motion to authorize the chair to sign documents related to the subordination of this loan to the primary lien holder.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Carries unanimously. All right. Looks like item number 5, Covenant Formation Assistance Program application. So this is for 63 Cato Lane. I'll say this is exciting because it's our first application to help create a covenant lot. So we may have some questions, commentary. The applicant is here. Would you like to speak to it all? If you please.
I'm Isaiah Stover. I'm the applicant at 63 Cato Lane. And so I'm kind of getting up to speed on some of these new initiatives that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is doing. And I've got to say, you guys are doing a great job. And this is very exciting. Also a former member of the board, so happy to see you guys making some progress. And so this is an application we put in. We'd like to create a covenant on our front cottage. And so it's my understanding that there are some funds available to help with some of that process. So I think at this point, I don't really have any questions, but I guess one question would be, would those funds be available to use for, let's say, a water connection? Or is it just surveying and application fees for that? The reason being, it's my understanding that the town will waive the sewer connection and privilege fees, but the water company hasn't gotten up to speed yet in sharing and that formation. So that would be one question.
Go ahead, Penny.
In terms of the permitting costs for the
The
water
permitting
company?
cost, I believe it's a $5,000 application fee for the water company to connect.
Right. I don't know the answer. We should probably.
Anne Cuspa might know the
Yeah.
answer.
Oh, good answer.
I'm not sure it's been contemplated.
And Cuspa from Housing Nantucket. We haven't talked about that. I would think that it would be relevant just because we're saying that planning board application fees could be covered under this. So I don't see any reason unless Tucker, can see one, but I think it would be.
No, I mean, I think it's up to the board. I mean, all of these fees ultimately are returned upon the sale of the lot, so I'm not sure that I would, I agree with Ann. Yeah.
So since we have a awesome attendance today, I'm just going to take a moment and kind of explain some of the concepts to some people who may not be up to speed on it. The idea of this program is to help existing homeowners soften the upfront costs on creating a covenant lot, where Housing Nantucket will help work with the engineer, the planning board, maybe the water company, and pay the cost to get the lot created. Once the existing homeowner sells the property, the money is then returned from the proceeds of the sale. So in an effort to help create more covenants, this is the program. I think your question is in line with the intent of the program, so I wouldn't see any reason to restrict that, from my thought.
Isaiah and I also talked about that he would request to the water company to see if they would be willing to consider a waiver like the select board has generously done. In the past, we have applied to the water board to ask for a waiver of connection fees when there's a affordable deed restriction on the property. But at this point, we'll get maybe a fire hydrant or something like that when we're doing the development, but the connection fee we are responsible for.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your enthusiasm to be the first and any effort that you help in paving the way for the rest. So I appreciate also that you're creating a covenant for another member of our community. So
Thank you.
I would echo that, but kind of to Ann's point, would the board perhaps want to send a letter to the water company asking them to consider this waiver?
I'd love to have a board member make a motion along that idea. I think that's a great idea.
Tucker, would you be willing to draft?
Absolutely, yep.
Yeah, I would make a motion that Tucker draft a letter to the water company requesting that fees are waived, the way sewer fees are waived.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. So is there continued discussion on the application in front of us for?
I have one question because this is the first. Would this be an A&R subdivision? You have enough frontage, or does it require driveways and roads or whatever?
I believe it will require driveway and roads because there isn't enough frontage for both dwellings.
I thought that.
You can get easements.
Yeah, I thought that
So
was.
with an easement.
Yeah.
They like
And-
shared driveways to one curb cut.
And that's what our plan is, to create one driveway.
You need relief if you ask for second curb cut.
So the answer is yes, that it would be under the A and R.
Approval not
Yeah,
required.
right,
Great,
with the planning board.
good. Makes
And
it easier.
Isaiah's already submit for the special permit.
In process.
Yes, in process, good.
Okay, great. Well, I move to approve the allocation for the first Covenant Formation Assistance Program. Grant?
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great.
Pass unanimously.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
Penny.
Penny second. Thank you very much. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry, I have enough paper, I lost my place. Here we go, financial review. Moving on to item number 6, financial review, Tucker?
Yeah, so we're going to take this up in March. Eleanor and Megan and I had a little challenge in coordinating our availability to take a look at the detailed information. So we will go over that at the next meeting. I think it's safe to say with approximately 28 million around, we're okay.
Great, okay. Great, so we'll keep that on the agenda for the next item. Item number 7. Now, should this read RFI, draft RFI for properties?
Yes.
Under Neighborhood First?
Yes.
So this is the request for interest going out to the general public for properties that would fall under the Neighborhood First program.
That's correct.
Great.
So in front of everyone here, and there are copies available at the back of the room if folks didn't pick one up on the way in. But we have had some conversations since our last meeting, first of all, around the timing of the RFI. And just to remind folks, this is a request for interest going out under the Neighborhood First funding to seek, to a large degree, scattered site locations, as has been contemplated along the way here. And so what we are recommending, and Ken and I have had a chance to talk a little bit about this, as I have with some of you, that we want to issue the RFI in advance of town meeting. So we are suggesting that it go out on March 25th. These are published on Wednesdays in the Central Register, so Wednesday, March 25th, with a inquiry deadline of May 13th. And that basically means folks would have approximately 6 weeks of this being available to take a look at it and come to us formally with any questions they may have about the RFI. And answers to those questions are then published publicly, so that one individual may send in a question, but the answer is provided universally to anyone interested in the RFI. We are proposing, and this is certainly open to discussion today, that we give folks until the middle of June to respond. This would allow us actually to utilize town meeting as a way of publicizing that this is out there. And as well, it may give the opportunity for some seasonal owners who may not be on island in the off season to be aware of what we're doing here. Then we need to indicate an intended property selection date, and here we've suggested mid-August for that timeline. We're not bound by that date, but just to give folks an idea of what we're trying to do. So those are the dates that we are suggesting. Maybe we should just pause and talk a little bit about those before we go into the criteria that we're looking at.
My commentary on the dates, I feel like the June 18th is probably fine for the deadline for submission. I'd like to make sure that we're including access to the seasonal community where their attention is on Nantucket. So I don't know whether to recommend pushing the inquiry deadline and the submission deadline both back a little bit further, or if this May date is right, but I want to make sure that the seasonal community understands what's happening here and has enough time to participate.
I agree with that. I think we should, push it back into the season a little bit, and then maybe even go to September for selection.
Do like 30 days across the board.
4 weeks.
Okay.
Penny?
Well, yeah, I was gonna suggest 3 weeks, but 4 weeks, if you don't think that's going to be detrimental in the big picture.
No, I mean, as you all are aware, there are a couple of different strategies under the Neighborhood First program, and this one is really geared more toward strategy one of that scattered site aspect. And so it is not the strategy that we're relying upon for safe harbor. So the timing is a little more flexible.
Yeah, I agree that we should make sure that that seasonal folks have access and knowledge about this before we close out the window for applying.
So push back 4 weeks.
I'd say 4
Yeah,
weeks.
okay.
So not all the items, not the issuance date, just inquiries,
No, yeah.
proposal, and
Yeah.
selection.
That's the
Yeah.
last 3.
Yep.
And then give them more time to respond once it's out, and more buzz.
Many of the area civic associations also meet during the early summer, and that might be an opportunity to take it on the road to them.
Do some outreach, yeah.
Okay.
All right, thank you. So then, obviously, there's a number of different sort of rote elements to what will be in the main body of the RFI, but the kind of the critical things are around the evaluation criteria by which you will be reviewing what is submitted. And so at the last meeting, we had a basic listing of criteria. In between now and then, have had the chance to meet with Penny and Ken to discuss that a bit further. And part of what we need to do is to define for the applicant what would be considered not advantageous, advantageous, or highly advantageous along each criteria. So an attempt has been made here to do that for the criteria that we have identified. So maybe before getting into those in a little greater depth, following the chart, you will see a list of information to be provided with the application. And these are things that we had identified in our work group that would typically be part of like information that one might request when doing a listing and so forth, to be useful to us as we look at the properties that are proposed. Maybe there are things that we want to add to this list. Maybe there are things we want to take away. I don't know. But the point I want to make is that if there are things on this list that are not reflected in the evaluation criteria, which we would use in making a determination, we need to bring them up into the chart and give them those same not advantageous, advantageous, highly advantageous definition, if that makes sense.
And I want to just add, these are in no particular order here,
Yeah.
this list.
Yeah.
Looking quickly, the two things that come to mind for me to be added, well, actually, it's 3. Some kind of homeowner disclosure statement about existing conditions on the property.
Statement of condition?
Yeah.
Or standard?
A home inspection. I don't know that I would make that a requirement, but if a home inspection,
Talked about that, so
We did.
And the issue being that may be something that we might have to fund, because in fact, that's almost unreasonable to ask the homeowner to do it when there's no commitment on our part to move forward with it.
no, I can appreciate that. And I would say maybe one of the 3 of the, whether it's a homeowner disclosure form in lieu of a home inspection, or
We could certainly ask if there has been a recent home inspection by a licensed home inspector,
and to supply it.
and to supply it if there has been, but I don't think that's something that we should expect the seller to provide necessarily. Yeah. Okay, what's the third thing?
Photography.
That's up here.
That's up
Oh,
to,
I'm sorry.
Number one on the list.
Oh,
But the statement of condition is a very good one to add.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a public comment if there's no board ones at the moment. Mary, would you like to step to the microphone?
Mary Longacre, Chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. And I would suggest that you add to your criteria, is the property currently experiencing erosion? And is the property in a flood zone, probably using the FEMA flood zones? And I want to say that wouldn't necessarily disqualify, but that you would have to take appropriate measures for any building on the property to be able to be resilient in the face of those
Or
threats.
just the cost of insurance, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
thank you. So, looking at the evaluation criteria, and I'll just try to maybe relatively briefly go through. But, we talked about proximity to other affordable developments. And basically, we're kind of weighting things that if you're further away from the existing sites, trying to get at that scattered notion, you're going to score higher. The closer, you're going to score lower. We talk about how, that this is designed toward, to some degree, the ability to utilize existing structures. Again, you're going to score higher if you have multiple structures that are exist and can be utilized, lower if you have non-existing structures, or especially if it's undisturbed or forested property. What is the condition of the housing units, which you were just getting at, Mr. Chair? And, here we're talking about, basically, we would be making an assessment ourselves based on photos and the property disclosure statement and inspections if they have them, but sort of in our sole discretion, not having the benefit of a current professional licensed inspection.
Brooke?
So in lieu of an inspection, I would say permission for us to access the property to inspect. Might be something we want to include in the list, or,
Right, so in the chart, it ultimately will be our determination, but we're going to want to request of everyone the ability to do a walkthrough.
yeah.
Yeah.
Prior to final scoring.
Yeah.
We should also just change the order. The next one should move up above condition, I think, because we talk about existing structures and then potential number of units.
Got it.
It's just
Yep,
more
that makes sense.
relevant. Sorry.
Yeah.
Can I give a little input?
Please?
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about wetlands and NEPA habitat issues. If you're gonna do scattered site, you might end up in some flood zones and, or even VN,
Yep.
VR. Might be, prohibitive in terms of build out improvements.
We
And,
have,
and require permits and,
right, we have that on the information list.
on the back.
Yep. We had both MISA and
Gotcha,
wetlands.
sorry, I didn't see that.
No worries. Okay, sorry.
Yep. But do we want to add that as an evaluation criteria that our wetlands
We'd
of,
have to say it something like this, limitations due to,
Buildable areas, right? Or, yeah.
yeah. And that's easy to do, the ABC on, yeah. That's a good idea.
so then we talked about incorporating an element of the value, sorry.
This one, we didn't really talk about this one.
Oh, the potential number of units under existing zoning. If it's 3 or less, you're sort of at the lower end. If you're 3 to 5, you're medium. 6 or more, you're scoring in the highly advantageous.
How does that differ from the density potential under existing zoning on the next page?
You could, how does it differ from the density potential?
There's another criteria on the next page. It may have been a duplication. Yeah, it may have just been a duplication, sorry.
Oh, it is. That's correct.
I-
Because it's the same methodology.
I think that that's a contradictory scoring element based on the first criteria on your distance to other units. If you're scoring high because you're further from units, but you're scoring higher in this category because you can have more units, are contradictory scoring elements to one another. Does that make sense?
They're mutually exclusive.
I don't disagree that,
Because we're talking about potential, not existing.
okay.
I'm not following.
I feel like they should be looked out outside of the scoring, in a sense. If I'm scoring high because I have one unit in the furthest part of Tom Nevers higher than a lot that has the more potential, let's say on Fairgrounds Road for units, that's the same area, I'm being discounted because I'm close to existing units. There's definitely a plus or minus in it. I'm not rationalizing. But
In the final analysis, though, do they not neutralize to some extent?
yeah, I guess they would.
Potentially.
Potentially.
I mean, that's the point of having the multiple criteria.
Okay.
I see what you're saying, though. And I don't think it's a sort of either or. I think each set of criteria have value in and of themselves.
There's no question there's more criteria. I guess in my mind, each zoning lot only allows up to 3 units. If we're looking at a lot that could be multiple lots after subdivision, it would then fall in the 6 or more category and wouldn't necessarily be a neighborhood first criteria conversation is the way my mind's going to it.
So you're saying whether or not a property is subdividable,
I guess that would be
which is another whole
Right.
criteria or set of criteria,
right.
which is a good one, because we hadn't thought about it. We were thinking more in terms of people bringing individual properties forward. So that should be added for sure. Yeah.
So how would you want to include the subdivision potential?
Well, if it could be subdivided, it would have greater value, wouldn't it?
It would fall into the 3 to 5 or 6 or more, would be more advantageous.
Yes, but like that's a proxy for the
Number of potential units.
number of potential units.
Yeah.
And they both kind of get at the same thing.
Yeah.
Right.
And actually, the number of potential units is actually more informative, in my opinion, than whether or not it's subdividable.
You can have primary, secondary, tertiary on 2 lots.
Two lots.
Opposed
Right.
to 1 lot.
Correct.
You wouldn't
No,
get
but
one.
right, but if I think the intention, and maybe we need to articulate it better, but the intention is if you have 20,000 square feet in R10,
Yeah.
you're going to yield 6 units, say.
Right.
The fact that it may be 1 lot right now doesn't work negatively against you
So I think that
for this criteria.
I think this criteria where it says potential number of units under existing zoning, that we need to rework that to include for potential subdivision.
Yeah, you can't have 6 units on an R10 lot, even if it's 20,000 square feet. It'd be 3 units and maximum ground cover 12.5%. But if you had the 2 lots, you could have 6
Yeah.
units.
Well, that's the potential of it.
No, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
It would be clear.
Potential total number of units or something, but we need to
Allowable.
reword that to allow for,
I would just put allowable.
yeah, including subdivision
By
potential.
right, like,
Right.
as we say.
So as Brooke pointed out, it was sort of in there twice, but the way that we have it in there on the second page is density potential under existing zoning.
Yeah, it's funny that we had it in here twice. I think we were actually thinking they were different things when we were discussing it.
Yeah, because one says 6 units.
Yeah,
But, and I think that's where you were contemplating subdivision, because you jumped from 5 to
Oh, and I
6
thought it
units.
was over here. Isn't that funny? Yeah, okay.
So we could parenthetically say there something like, including
The potential for subdivision.
subdivision, yeah, something.
One of them should say that,
Yeah.
and then it differentiates them. Oh, it's so good to get other eyes on this.
Definitely. Oh, got cut out. All right. So then, the cost potential, or the total cost per potential unit is a notion that we have talked about. I'm not sure if we've landed on kind of the right definition for that in terms of the scoring. But you can see in there, not advantageous being basically above the original estimate per unit of the neighborhood first original example. Advantageous, we're saying, would be between 450 and 690. And then highly advantageous is if in the end it's under 450 per unit. I think we're going to need to include in here some universal assumption about, what building a new unit on a location would cost to help equalize the scoring.
We also need to point out that these figures included tax credits, didn't they? Some of these numbers?
No,
not?
not from neighborhood first, yeah.
Thank you.
I feel like the scale of distance to is for the next category. Sorry for jumping ahead.
Broader,
It's too
narrow.
narrow.
Yeah, I do too.
What would feel appropriate?
Well, if I picked the Rotary as one spot and it was 7 miles to Sconset, 7 miles would be the outside not advantageous.
More than 5 or something, maybe.
Or like the middle point of the island, if you're at the extreme of it, is less, and then as you work your way back in.
Okay, so use the main Rotary as our
Bullseye.
bullseye.
If we assume that that's the highest density of employment on the island in that vicinity, yeah.
Radii, yeah.
Or you could pick the oak tree at the high school, might be a little closer, like,
Right.
seriously, like the hospital, the school, like,
Right.
there's more in that vicinity. Is that an oak tree? Elm, excuse me. Sorry, I saw you cringe, Mary. Thank you for the correction.
So do we increase the numbers?
Yeah, it has to be a broader range.
It's got to be further. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's got to, because this doesn't include the whole island. 1 mile from
Basically disadvantages all of Nantucket.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, though it does say from a commercial place of employment, so technically Nantucket Marine is a commercial place of
Right.
employment,
Yeah,
right? So it,
yeah, we were not trying to discriminate against your
What if you
employment
use-
location.
See, the CMI district as a whole, and the perimeter of that could be your edge. Parts of the Island District,
We can use anything,
yeah. I mean, that incorporates the Rotary,
yeah.
this whole.
That's very logical to me because that's the highest density of jobs in the CMI, and then go out from there on the radius. I understand the individual spots, but that's a tricky.
right, because the person who ends up in that house isn't necessarily going to work in Nantucket Marine, so.
Right.
So
And then
I
some
do think-
places of employment are seasonally, and I think you need to.
So, yeah,
So what are the numbers then? Are we going to say like, what would be the logic of setting a perimeter, right? Is it bikeable? Is it
It's none of those.
none of those
It's a
things?
pure
It's just-
distance. It has nothing to
just-
do with
just
transportation.
Raw distance?
Because
Okay.
if you start defining modes of transportation, you're excluding groups of people.
Yeah.
So it's just a distance.
Okay,
I understand where you're going, but
yeah, okay. So what are we going to change it to?
I would take the edge of the CMI and I would use Map Geo and draw a line to the coast of the island Whatever the furthest one is, that's the outside. And then bring it in halfway,
Oh, I see, halfway.
and then,
And you score higher if you're closer.
yes, which is what this says, right? So if
Yeah.
you're within a half mile of CMI, it's highly advantageous. If you're within 2.5 miles, assuming it's a 5 mile scale, whatever.
Which again, could be offset by number one, which is proximity to existing.
To existing unit.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's not an
Yeah.
either or.
Right.
It's in conjunction and in total.
Right.
And then the same thing applies to the next two, which is public transportation and proximity to schools.
Well, the thing with, the schools, I mean, the schools are a definitive location, the public schools, so that we can reference that. But the public transportation, I think if you are within a stop
Yeah,
on the
certain
year-round
radius, right,
service, that can float more.
I would agree with that, yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's
And
measurable
that's a
from,
good definition.
yeah.
it is. I like that one.
So sewer and water is fairly straightforward. Energy efficiency is one we wrestled with a little bit.
I have a question, sorry,
Yeah.
I'm picking apart so is sewer mapped or available? Because currently there are mapped sewer districts that will not be available for many years. So available or mapped
Our
is,
tent was existing
Okay.
town water and sewer,
great.
so we should put that future potential. Now, and the energy efficiency, as Tucker said, we did really struggle because it's sort of like, how do you define that? Well, it could be the age of the building, but that could also be offset by upgrades or recent retrofits. So I think under the energy efficiency, we need a sort of a subcategory or sub-definitions of things like, are there alternative energy sources
So
in place?
I may, if it made sense to the board, maybe I will reach out both to Lauren and I'm briefly forgetting the gentleman, Andy, who was very active in the Neighborhood First discussions on this topic, and maybe get their recommendations.
It's a great idea.
I don't know enough about the statement I'm going to make, so I need somebody to, but there is a test now for the building code.
Blower test.
Yeah, the blower test.
Yeah.
So I would consider that, but all building permits for new construction need them in some renovations over a certain cost. I guess I would make that one of the criteria. It either has it or it doesn't, and that's the true, right? There's a standard that exists for that test. It's a certificate, it's definitive.
Yeah.
And it's something we would undertake as the buyer, right?
Well, if there's a structure there, then it either has it or it doesn't. Right, because they're gonna, part of, on the list was a CO.
So rather than a rating criteria, just a piece of information.
I guess, yeah. The rating criteria is tough unless we have an energy specialist going through and looking, are they single pane or double pane, or is
Isn't
it?
this really two things? Isn't it age of existing dwellings is
Yeah.
one thing by itself?
Yes.
And the secondary, another subject would be energy efficiency?
I would think
I
so.
think it's two separate things,
And the experts can help us
right?
figure out.
Did you hear me say that?
I'm sorry. No, sorry about that.
I think this is two separate things. Age of existing dwellings is one thing,
Yeah.
and energy efficiency is another thing.
I would include age as original age and date of last
Age and, yeah.
renovation. Right, because if somebody puts the age as 1850 and it was renovated in 1974, those are two.
But I just want to make sure we're doing, like, we're sort of automatically saying if you got an older house, you're scoring lower.
That's gonna be now three things, because you can't do age and renovations in the same criteria. So it really has to be, maybe it's existing structures with three subcategories, A, B, C, age of original structure, age of renovations, and any energy efficiency.
I think energy efficiency is a really, really tricky one to nail down unless
too,
there's
yeah.
a standardized
Quantifiable
certificate that is issued that says something. And I would look to the department that we have, what is their standard of quality to determine that, right?
Right.
Because, you talk to one person, they're going to say Anderson 400 series are the most efficient. And somebody else says Brosco single pane are the most efficient. And a house in town that has single pane windows because HTC makes it versus a house out of town that has true divided light double panes, which one's more efficient, right? Like, it's speculative enough in this environment that I don't know how you define it. I think it would be encouraged by us to select homes that were more energy efficient, but it's a struggle to decide. I would
Well,
think,
it's one of the criteria recommended by the Neighborhood First Committee. So I want to find a way to include it as a evaluation item.
I had a conversation with Andy, and he said he has ideas about how to do
Yeah.
this. So I think rather than trying to
Great.
figure it out, let's
Yeah.
go to someone who really knows
Yes,
what they're
I
talking
also
about.
think we need in this list to be, as Tucker alluded in the beginning, as inclusive as possible of any information that matters to us.
Yeah.
Like, we can't be going back and saying, oh, by the way, right? We have to really get this right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Which is partly why having a little additional time to get it right is important. Because in effect, your decision is going to get pre-programmed by what is in this chart. There's not really room for interpretation. Yeah.
great. So we'll go to Andy on that and come back for recommendations on how to solve for
Yeah, and Laura's, yeah.
efficiency. Great.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So we've got some time.
Density under existing zoning,
Talked about that one.
availability of the property to close.
Seller to close.
Yeah, availability of the seller, as Penny's pointing out, to close.
So with the dates that are listed on there, is that in full accounting of what our needs are for the 24 units every couple years to then satisfy our maintaining shy?
Theoretically.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so
To your point about being inclusive, I don't want to put a short window, 2021 on it.
So that's a good point. And another benefit of having this longer time of this being out and available to folks and making them aware of the program and hopefully encouraging more people to participate or have an interest in participating is we also will know by June, July, what comes next with Six Fairgrounds, which could be our more immediate next 2-year period of safe harbor. So to an extent, and this is really where the realtors may have the best information, we want to have the longest time available to us with respect to when we want to close. And
So
I just want to say I struggle with this a little bit because our job is to get people into housing. So,
Which is why I advocate for this program being less,
restrictive.
not considered as critical a part of the safe harbor calculation, because we have other strategies to manage safe harbor, and that I see this part of our implementation of Neighborhood First as a more, let's get housing done, ready, and occupied on them. And again, for the same reasons that I struggle with the conflict between staying in safe harbor and delaying things in order to set up years of safe harbor versus getting people in housing. So
I appreciate both of those statements and thought processes, but I don't want to eliminate somebody because their timeline is long. In my mind, I would like to see the criteria rather than a hard, fast stop date be
I think we're
highly
saying-
advantageous
we're agreeing with that.
highly advantageous is 90 days. advantageous is 180 days and not advantageous is greater than 180 days. That way, the rolling timeline based on what we're trying to achieve is a period of time, not a hard, fast date.
Right, it makes it more generic.
Right. And it rolls. That way, if some household is doing family planning and says, you know what, in 2 years from now, we're moving mom over to our island home, this will work, we want to put the property in the program, but we don't want to close for 20 months. That might be a property that has 6-unit potential for us, it's just right. Let's put it in the queue, gets us a greater number of units to put people in housing, but doesn't cut off because it doesn't meet the deadline.
Yeah, that's fine. That's great. So you score best if you're available to close quickly, and to the extent that you're not available to close till later, you score lower.
Yeah, and whatever the dates are, I don't have a commitment to the timing, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, or 12
No,
months.
but we'll modify it this way. Everyone can think about it further. And
One thing that was very difficult, if I might mention, to address here was the issue of displacing people who are existing as tenants in year-round properties. It's a real issue,
It's a huge issue.
and I don't know how you quantify that. Or if you can.
I think most of these properties that we will end up looking at are already servicing a segment of the marketplace that we don't want to displace.
right,
So,
that's what we're talking.
right, what does that look like? Ken?
We're talking about that. I mean, the rationale is that we are preventing the year-round housing to go to seasonal housing
Yep.
by buying it from a year-round person. Now, the issue is complicated, he's got a renter in it, but if it's only an individual or a family living in there, I don't see that as a real problem from a policy point of view, because like what you're doing is keeping it, although you're not adding inventory, you're preventing the decline in inventory.
And adding inventory by virtue of being able to build secondaries and tertiaries.
To the
So,
extent those properties can do that.
and under guidelines, Chapter 40B guidelines for shy listing units, if we build an 80% unit, it's possible that the tenant could stay, if there is a tenant in the house that we're buying, that they could stay at whatever they're paying.
So,
And we get it shy listed by creating an additional unit that gets
Right.
listed and lotteried out at 80%.
so does availability of property to close or seller to close become free and clear of tenancy?
That's the next thing.
The next one.
Okay.
That was our intent, at least, yeah.
Because in my experience, most places that, I don't know, in my years of transactions, they're always closing. So people are either waiting for their leases to run out or they've bought people out of them. So if you're truly a seller for a program, you're going to be cycling that anyhow, whether it's free market or with us.
Well, it's not.
Most of the time.
It's not completely unreasonable to contemplate a situation in which an existing tenant may be able to stay.
Right.
Right.
Sorry.
No, no. No, that was good. All good. Excellent.
I think the way that when I read just the headline encumbrances, I thought of a lot more than just tenancy.
Yeah.
Mechanics liens.
Whatever it may be. So do we need to break that out? So encumbrances are encumbrances in the vast array that they could be, and tenancy is its
Such
own.
as, yeah.
Easements to other properties,
Tax liens.
yeah, tax liens,
And
first right of refusals.
Right. That's right. I think that the tenancy thing should be its own piece.
Right.
Right.
And then encumbrances can,
Other things.
And is that in the evaluative criteria, or is that just information?
I think that's an evaluative
it's a
criteria depending
I
on
wanna
what
know
they
I'm
are.
getting into.
So you rate it by no encumbrances,
Would be
some
highest,
encumbrances,
right.
and lots of encumbrances?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like Brooks Correct. Like, we have to define what it is.
Yeah,
More than two.
I don't know the answer,
that's,
but I can think of a variety of scenarios
Or, you know
that.
what? That could also go, instead of having that on the criteria, that could go on the information list
that's
that
what
we're
I'm
requesting.
suggesting.
I think that might be a better place for that.
If you look at a deed, they all have subject to the following encumbrances, special permits
Right.
and obviously taxes and mortgages.
But
Probate.
and the information is great to have, as we talked about when the three of us met. But again, I'm just going to underscore that if it's going to end up being something by which you are making a
Criteria.
determination,
Right.
it's got to be up in the chart in a understandable way.
okay. Well, obviously, no encumbrances would be highly advantageous.
Right.
And the question is, you have to have 3 ratings though, right?
Yes.
So you've got
And they can't
one encumbrance and then more than one.
Yeah, that's actually probably a good way to do it.
Mary,
Yeah, Mary, do you want to step to the microphone?
wrestling.
As opposed to quantity, wouldn't, you could look at whether the encumbrance is permanent, whether it can be resolved, or whether it will expire. You could look at the ability of the encumbrance to be mitigated rather than how many of them there are, because you could have 6 really little tiny ones that don't matter and one really big one that's huge. You could have historic preservation, you could have a conservation restriction. You know, there's just, as Brian said, all kinds of things. So rather than looking at quantity, you know, look at whether or not they can be removed so that you can achieve your goal.
Yeah, some are in perpetuity and some are expired by statute.
Deed restrictions.
You mean, are those listed in the
Oh, yeah,
deed?
they're on the deed.
Yeah.
I just was saying, I think we need to add deed restrictions under the deed, because that's an obvious place to start.
Who knew it was so complicated?
I was going to say, this is not an easy feat. Thank you for the work, like, up to this
We'll
point.
come back with version 2.
But you had to make sure that whatever was gonna be a defining characteristic to choose one as opposed to the other, had to be there, and it was, everybody else had to be aware of it and be able to be measured by it. So
Yeah.
Does somewhere in the RFI say that we may choose none or we may
Yes,
choose all?
No, in the RFI, just like with Six Fairgrounds, there will be an explicit statement that says we're under no obligation to do anything.
Okay, let's see what comes up. It's gonna be fun.
Continued discussion? Hearing none?
So, yes, so.
Do you need an action item from us?
No,
Or are you?
not right now, but I really want, as you can tell, this evaluation aspect is the most central and critical part. So what I'm going to do is revise the chart and the information we're requesting based on today's discussion. And obviously, we don't have a full complement of folks today, so I want the input of the other members as well. But I'm going to send just that out and ask folks to kind of sleep on it and give further feedback, anything that you think is helpful, so that will then inform the final draft, if you will, of the document. And the other part, like I said, is really, there's a lot of rote language, just like, we're not obligated to do anything type of stuff, but this is the meat.
So when should we have a goal of getting this wrapped up at our next meeting?
Absolutely, yeah.
When is our next meeting?
17th of March,
So it's a week before our deadline for,
correct. And I've checked with the select board. So as you know, when we're expending money over 100,000, we're basically making a recommendation to the board to approve it. Here, in part because we're not obligated to do anything, we do not need a select board approval before the RFI goes out. It would be at the point at which we're recommending certain properties for acquisition.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Nice.
Any more on the RFP as written? Hearing none, we'll move to item 8. The Nantucket Data Platform Q&A, is that right? As a follow-up.
Yeah, so Brooke and I had a chance to connect with Caroline Fry of the data platform, following up on the questions that the board had following the data platform presentation at the end of last year. And they have provided, which was in the packet, answers to the list of specific questions that we had. I think that one of the main, I mean, we can go into as much detail as folks would like, but I think one of the main issues of interest was around the differential between the total number of units and the proportion of year-round versus seasonal. And so that is one of the areas that they spent some time trying to give us the explanation as to why there would have been those differentials. So the main answer is methodology with respect to how the census may classify a year-round residence and the number of residences versus how the data platform does. So our understanding is that, do you have, Eleanor, the presentation that they sent this morning?
I did not put that on this flash drive, but I printed it out.
Okay, all right, so we have,
Each of you has a hard copy.
yeah, unfortunately, we don't have it up on the screen, but you'll see in the short presentation deck that so the census showed more housing units than NDP showed. As well, the percentage of year-round housing units was much higher under NDP's methodology versus ours. And so the way that NDP had explained how that difference might come about is if you were to go and look at the slide with the multiple structures on the same site, they were explaining how the census methodology has a default mechanism that basically they'll knock on someone's door 3 times, and if they do not connect with the owner, it automatically goes into the seasonal category. So by default,
Vacant. They say vacant.
Right.
yeah,
Which translates
which
into.
they're going to interpret ultimately as seasonal use versus year-round use. So that is how they would explain the census showing, a much higher rate of seasonal usage than year-round usage, which logically makes sense. Similarly, they would say that the census folks, when they go and knock on the door at the residences, they would see in the illustration, for example, oh, there are 3 buildings that would appear to be could be used
Housing
in an
units.
individual manner as a housing unit. And NDP would look at it and say, well, this is one estate and used by a single family. So again, this is their explanation as to the principal differences in where the numbers turned out in their report.
So for me, the question was, how do we as a group utilize the data relative to what we understand through the census and the SHI-list numbers that are based on the census? So we have sort of what the state mandates that we do based on the census numbers, and that exists, and that methodology's there, it's unchanging. It's going to produce a new number. And then we have what NDP has come up with, which their methodology is to my estimation, more thorough and more accurate than what the census is doing. And so the difference shouldn't substantially change what we do, in that the data platform numbers reflect more accurately what exists in our housing landscape. Yes, the census data will force the issue on the SHI-list piece to be readjusted in whatever direction that goes, but those two are sort of separate as we evaluate them and we go about the business of solving the housing crisis on Nantucket. Does that make sense? And I think the challenge we have is that the public is more familiar with the SHI-list number and those data points that have been around now for 10 years, 9 years. So we're going to have to do a good job of explaining why this data is more accurate and why we would be basing decisions on it.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to make.
Go ahead, Penny.
Yeah, I'm not going to make the assumption that it's more accurate. I just feel like there are too many vagaries here. I still do. I think in terms of what we are charged to do, I agree completely with Brooke that the census data is the matrix by which we should be operating. This could be supplemental information.
Well, that's not exactly what I was saying. I
know, it's what I'm saying, though.
I think that we have to be able to look at the two as independent sources of information for us, and in terms of what we have to do for the SHI-list and what we need to do to meet the community's needs.
So for different reasons, I agree with Penny's statement and the vagaries of it and the data. While the NDP data is interesting to me, I'm really curious to see what next year's census looks like in comparison to their data. The biggest factor that's not going to be accounted for in this is we were in the bottom of a cycle in 2010 and there was no work here. So there was nobody living here on a year-round basis or in a seasonal, because we didn't have the jobs. And presumably if we're in the same portion of the cycle that we're in now, the number is going to be dramatically higher, more likely to the NDP number in our next count, unless something shifts dramatically. We won't know this till 2021 when the new census comes out. But I feel like the methodologies I question somewhat. I'm confused about the total housing unit number. I don't understand why this isn't just a hard, fast number from the building department, and how many tax bills are we collecting on?
And excuse me, but through you, the NDP says there was not sufficient construction on island to account for such an increase. Their calculation being 5,900 and change. The census is 4,200 and change. And then they follow that up and say, no, there was not sufficient construction on island. So it is likely due to two factors. Housing was converted from seasonal or /vacant, which I guess is the same thing, to year-round, and or the census incorrectly designated housing units as seasonal vacant that are actually occupied year-round. So they could both be wrong, really.
Right. I feel like anecdotally, we're all seeing the marketplace go from units that are year-round or in a rental or ownership sense, and becoming vacation or seasonal. In my experience, last year I participated in at least 6 transactions that were year-round homes that went the other way. So the large variation in the data compared to my practical experience it doesn't line up for me. So I'm really curious to line it up in the future. I think we do need to be cautious of, to your point, Brooke, where do we expect the this is an opportunity to track where we think the shy number is going to and use that as a target.
Well, yeah, and I don't know if we can extrapolate from the NDP number where the shy unit number will go. I mean, again, it's sort of, for good or for bad, the census is the determiner on what will be shy, what our shy target is. And no doubt there are imperfections in the census process, but it is what it is. I think part of what the NDP study underscores is the importance of folks filling out the census information, that as accurate account as possible is only going to benefit the island in a multitude of ways.
Just so you know, we have a complete count census committee involved with it. There wasn't one in 2010, and it was really active.
Yes, absolutely. No,
A lot of social media out there, a lot of publicity, a lot of event planning, so hopefully there will be a better response rate.
Yeah, thank you for the work that you're doing and that the committee is doing, and for mentioning that, because I know that there's a big effort underway and it's very important.
I think there's a future agenda item to talk about communications, and maybe that's an opportunity to be included in future communication efforts to help support that committee.
I just want to say, I appreciate that neither method is infallible, but I am more interested in myself, just as a member of the committee, historically and statutorily what we have to pay attention to, which is what you just said off the census numbers, that's all. I agree that this could certainly be a tool, but it needs to be defensible and accurate.
I concur.
Okay.
I know we have a lot more to work.
I was going to say, so sometimes studies raise more questions than they answer.
Yeah.
Okay, any more on item 8? Okay, hearing none. I just want to check in, Tucker. I think we were looking to hear from another board member.
Yeah, and I believe that Rita is able to attend at the executive session, and I told her if she were here at 2:30, that would be terrific.
Okay,
so
great.
we should try to aim
Perfect.
for that.
Yeah, I can aim for that. I just want to make sure we. Item number 9, 2020 town meeting articles. So, in a flurry of emails, and I can't remember which one I read when and where, there was some discussion. The planning board had reviewed a few articles, passed on negative recommendations or not to adopt recommendations based on some recommendations by both the moderator and town council.
Do you want me to run through them quickly?
Sure.
Okay, so the two that have been discussed at length are, first, a proposal that, it basically in a nutshell was an effort to have new building permits match the 10% shy list requirement by requiring that every 10th building permit be for a shy listed unit or affordable unit, and that was determined not to be constitutional, so it can't move forward. I personally love the spirit of the concept and the spirit behind the attempt, but it has a lot of negative unintended consequences, never mind being unconstitutional, being determined to be not legal. The other one was a proposal for allowing additional development on larger properties in the LUG. It started out LUG 2 and 3 that would permit an additional covenant dwelling, so it would increase the number of units available on the property from 3 to 4 if 2 of the 4 were covenant. And it went around all of the various committees, and under discussion it was determined, a couple of things were determined. It was too similar to an application a warrant article from the same folks last year, and there is a rule that you can't bring the same thing. You have to wait 2 years in between. And then in addition, it was very broadly applied across the island, and there were concerns about it basically being too broad-based. And also the property in question is in Tom Nevers, and I think that they have been informally referred back to the Tom Nevers Association to try to come up with a neighborhood solution and agreement on it.
And the proponent was here at our last meeting, and he indicated that they may be proceeding to try and get permission for some sort of pilot project on a few properties in the area that are oversized.
So we'll probably see something in the future on that.
Okay, great.
But again,
Thank you for-
appreciate the effort and the thought around crafting zoning changes that support affordable housing.
Hearing no more on number 9, we'll jump to item 10. So we want to look at a conversation at amending the closing cost assistance program to include applicants up to 175% AMI.
Yeah, and you've
Give us the
already.
background.
Yeah, so the board may be aware that Richmond is in the process of developing 5 of their 175 AMI targeted homes to be completed at some point this summer. And so they recently had a lottery. There are two homes already that are definitely going to be part of that, and there are some others sort of in the works. I don't know if that's the right way to say it.
So my understanding is that only 2 people who applied for the lottery qualified under the circumstances. So there is opportunity for 3 more.
There's
people
opportunity for more
To be
folks
awarded,
to
yeah.
be for more homes to be awarded. Actually, Ann and I met with Richmond last week. So there are a group of additional applicants who narrowly missed the underwriting criteria, and so Richmond is working with a third party, SEB Housing, to administer the lottery and so forth. And the way things were originally organized, the underwriting criteria that they were using mirrored the DHCD underwriting criteria for the 80% home buyer. And so what Richmond came to us to talk about is, is there some room to tweak the underwriting criteria that might allow a little more room than the strict 80% guidelines. So, for example, the 80% guidelines say you can have no more than 30% of your gross income going toward your housing cost. So Richmond was saying, we had additional folks who met the income requirements, they were under the 175, who have the financing from, say, a local bank in order to support to a mortgage for the property, but they were, at 31% or 32% of their income. Is that something that you guys could take a look at? So we had a constructive meeting with them, and we're doing a little more due diligence. Because we don't want to foster the opportunity for someone to get in over their head. However, there may be a little bit of a greater window that we could that would work for everybody.
I was just going to say that would be open to all.
Right.
Actually achievable.
Yes.
Great.
So the background of this is when we did the application to the hospital, the CHIP program, we did amend our application to them asking for a grant for closing cost assistance up to 175% AMI, knowing that these houses were coming
Eventually,
in the
yeah.
pipeline. And so really what this request today of this board is to formalize a change in the closing cost assistance program to elevate the top end to be at 175% area median income, up from 150%. It's within our allowable range of up to 200% AMI. So it's really just formalizing something we've talked about but never actually took a vote on.
Great. So we're looking.
Yeah, so actually, just while you're mentioning that point, so I'm not sure that technically we've redefined our own 200%.
Oh, we haven't?
No,
We're at
the
175.
money has
We're at
been
175.
scheduled that way, but we're at 175.
Oh,
So,
okay, sorry.
so at a subsequent meeting, we probably do want to go to 200, but today we just want to make the closing costs match our current 175 level.
Okay, sorry about that. Thanks.
So I'm looking for a motion on an amendment to the closing cost assistance
I'll
program.
make a motion to amend the closing cost assistance program to include applicants up to 175% of AMI.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Carries unanimously.
Great.
Let's see. Item 11. Do we want to carry this item? Is this
I think in the interest of time, yeah.
okay? Item 12.
Is that, are we on communications? I don't have the agenda.
Oh, I don't see. Communications is next within general updates.
Oh, yeah, okay. All right.
Okay. So item number 12, general updates and discussion. A State House update?
Very quickly, there seems to be some continued momentum on the transfer fee legislation. The Revenue Committee reset its own deadline to report out both our home rule petition, a number of other home rule petitions, and the coalition transfer fee legislation, of which there are several versions, from February 5th to March 16th. And there have been several meetings with key legislators in leadership positions who have indicated their receptivity to this, to the transfer fee generally. There are still some aspects to be worked out, but in short, there's some positive direction, and there may be some activity between now, given that our next meeting isn't until after that March 16th deadline, but of folks on the board and others who've been very active in this effort to try to get it across, get the next step done in March.
Well, those who've been attending, thank you. Next, is that all on that one, Tucker? Communications plan was the next item under general updates. Brooke? Rima?
Okay. So Dave Iverson and Rima and I met and discussed what we thought this needed to be. And then we reached out to Grant Sanders, who is the principal of SAND, which is a marketing agency, and had a conversation with him. He had helped us with a chip application that we didn't get. So, and we asked him to put together a proposal to help us with two specific initiatives. One is to create a marketing plan and content for said marketing plan that would basically inform the community of what we're doing in the Affordable Housing Trust, new program creation, updates on Neighborhood First. There's a list on page 95. Safe harbor status, just an ongoing effort to keep the public informed about all things that are going on related to housing efforts on Nantucket. And then the second part of this is to create a basic webpage that will be a starting point for what we had imagined would be a housing hub, a much more substantive web presence for us. And we understand now, we did some research into what the limitations upon us are as a town entity and how we have to work with existing infrastructure and personnel responsible for deciding what can go out in the public sphere from town. And so basically what Grant has proposed is in part his own education and interface with town, so we know we're in compliance, as well as the creation of content over the next several months in multiple forms, trying to use as many different methods of public outreach as possible to reach people where they find information and to reach the broadest audience. And that's going to include, putting out the RFI for properties, and as we do other neighborhood first initiatives, making sure that the public is brought along in a transparent way as to what we're doing and how we're deciding to spend the money. So we are asking this board to consider approving a contract with the sand agency, and the numbers are on page 111.
Which page? 111?
111 of the.
Just out of curiosity,
Yes.
did we talk to any other vendors?
In the interest of time, we did not.
Do you think there's any perceived conflict because of this vendor's role with Act Now?
I think that's a great question.
I think it's an excellent question. I am. That does not concern me. I think you hire a person who's good at what they do, and
I think he can compartmentalize the work, and especially communicating with the IT department in town, so he understands the constraints.
I'm not concerned about his ability to do that. I'm concerned about perception within the community.
I think based on the question, based on the potential perception, we should look for a second proposal and weigh them against one another. I think that this individual is highly qualified, has an incredible pulse on this community, and I've seen a survey he did about ferry trip rides was incredibly successful in data gathering, and I appreciate what he does, but based on the political environment now, what it is, we should probably look to have another proposal to weigh the two against one another.
okay.
Any ideas as to who else we should contact?
Well, there are several different, graphic design folks, firms, affiliated, either located or affiliated with the island that we could inquire with and see if they had availability and interest.
Right,
Yeah.
okay,
Happy to do that.
yeah.
I do want to say that I appreciate what is in here, and being a person who lives in this digital marketing world, I think that this is a great first off proposal to lead into discussion and take us where we want to go, because we do need to increase our communications with the general public. It was one of the strategic plan points as highlighted by the specialists we brought in to work with us, and this is definitely the direction we need to go. I'd love to evolve it a little bit more before we jump in.
Well, given the time frame, if we waited until March to approve, a contract under $10,000, we're really that's such a crunch to actually get anything done. So we may need a special meeting if we have more than one proposal to choose from.
When you refer to the crunch and the timing, what is the specific item you're looking to make sure that is
Prior to
marketed?
town meeting.
Okay. Any more board comments? I just see a general public. Mary?
Sorry, just to make a point, if this is a communications request, you don't go to graphic designers. That's a completely different field. So you're looking for communications professionals. Just.
And I believe there are limited resources to do a comprehensive plan of this nature, which is
On Nantucket. But
True.
the question is, do we open this up to we can look at some other communities that are using housing groups, right? What is Provincetown using a communications plan? They've done some good work. There's the group over on the Vineyard, it's not the Housing Trust. It is
Island
the-
Housing Trust.
Yeah, the Island Housing Trust, are they doing their communications in-house, or are they working with somebody? There may be a couple of opportunities to look outside. As I said, I do believe that this professional is more than qualified, but we should be looking at more than one proposal.
Okay?
okay.
Where's my list? Where did I leave off? Sorry.
Well,
No, that's not it.
Thanks. Tucker, you want to
yeah,
talk?
yeah, I mean, it just, actually, we'll be attending a seminar later this week with Dr. Manuel, who we've talked about bringing here to the island, so we'll have a chance to discuss in a little more detail in person, the scheduling of that, but I think we've talked about in prior meetings here that we're going to try to target a summer date, so we have our seasonal community here for this event as well. And then the next item is regarding the housing production plan. Again, we have time, but this is just on here as a reminder that following town meeting, we're going to want to put together an RFP to bring in someone like a Judy Barrett, who assisted us last time with the update of our plan, which expires next year.
And this is independent of what you were describing to me about being a housing choice.
Yeah, so housing choice, thank you for mentioning that. And I don't know, maybe this is sort of going into the other business category next, but
Okay.
I would take the opportunity to share with the board that, as you'll recall, we are a housing choice community. We were part of the inaugural class. This is a program of the governor and lieutenant governors that is one of their priority areas. And so we were pleased to be part of that inaugural class. When you are selected, your membership, if you will, is good for 2 years, and then you need to reapply. So we are actually in the process of reapplying over the course of the next 4 weeks. The applications are due toward the end of March. And you qualify for the program through two avenues. One is through production. And I think we meet the criteria there. And as well, you qualify through best practices. And in order to meet the best practice threshold, there are 14 best practices, and a community needs to hit 7 of them. So in evaluating those with the planning department, we presently meet 6 of the 14, and we could meet a 7th if the community has adopted to be included with the short-term rental tax, and which we have done, and we have designated a portion of that specifically to go toward affordable housing. And so that latter part is something that the select board has not yet formally done. So we had, as you recall, we had requested to the select board last year when they took up this topic of the short-term rental that they make a designation of those funds to go toward housing and clean water, which was the other principal intended beneficiary of the funds. So we had worked alongside CHAB, made that request. The select board deferred making a decision on how to use those funds at the time, but this may be the time to revisit that topic with the board.
So just to elaborate on that, the board chose not to make a decision at that time because they were afraid of a budget shortfall based on the existing monies that come in.
Correct.
Under it's not meals, it's strictly accommodation tax, right?
Rooms tax.
Yeah, the rooms tax. So now we are getting closer to that, but that information is still not available as far as how much has been generated in the year. So we need to ask for basically a blind request.
I mean, I think that while the final numbers, if you will, obviously aren't in, I think that my understanding is that there has been some periodic general update from the finance director to the board, and certainly revenues are up over last year, under the short-term umbrella. Yep. So we are generating more money than has historically been relied upon in the general operating budget.
So can we write a letter that's asking for a percentage net of previously allocated amounts to then present to the select board at this point? To represent?
So I'm going to go back to the Housing Choice Program Director just to get a little greater definition around what would constitute demonstration
for item 7.
Allocating a portion. But it doesn't require a specific percentage, but just that a portion is going toward this. And so with that specific information, I think a letter would be great to go to the board.
Now, is this the path? So with 6 of 14, we're failing, right? In my mind, on a percentage basis. How do we get the other 8? And is this one the path of... we only need 7, but that's half of the 14. So how do we get to 80% all the time so we're not seeking out one is my...
Yeah, so this is the one that we could get within the time frame.
Okay.
Depending on the requirement of what demonstrates showing that you've allocated a portion. But
so we can make our near-term goal this is the one near-term, and our long-term goal the other 7.
The other 7 are things that would take a fair amount of time to do.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yes, Penny.
Can we put it on a future agenda to discuss what the other 7 are? And make sure everybody's
on the same
informed?
page. Let's do that. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Great. Yep.
Also, one of our select board members has joined us. She might be able to provide some insight on the discussions about the room occupancy tax allocation of the additional income.
Rita Higgins, Select Board. At this stage, we haven't had any specific discussions about exactly where it will go. I do think that we'll have to keep Affordable Housing Trust up there in the discussions because over time, I think other items have sort of pushed to the front. So I think at this stage, it's really important just to keep reminding everyone that the Affordable Housing Trust would be a good place to put some of the money.
Just quickly through Brian, are those meetings likely to be held in public session? Those deliberations?
I would think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ken?
Ken Bogrand, real estate specialist. Town administration is looking at this issue, and I think has scheduled a meeting sometime in March to address the question of the allocation with respect to the room tax and also with respect to the Cape and Island waterways thing, which is involved in this. And the problem is that without having a confirmation from the DOR with respect to any of the numbers, there's nothing really that you can do moving forward because they have to confirm the numbers. And the reason we couldn't move forward with it last year was the fact that without confirmation, it would affect our credit rating. And that was something that we couldn't possibly think about doing, having just simply acquired AAA rating.
I just encourage the board members here, and if we can work towards a letter, to continue to be vocal on this to the select board, whatever opportunity we have. I very clearly remember a night speaking against my peers to raise the tax percentage in hopes that a portion of it was going to go towards housing. So if we can maintain that energy and effort, that would be great. Any more under other business? Hearing none. All those attended, thank you. And the public, is there any open for public comment? Seeing none, close that, move to board comments. Having none, I'll look for a motion for item 16.
You want me to do it? I can read it.
Okay, great.
I have it in front of me. I'll make a motion that we close the public session, am I saying this right, of our meeting for the purpose, we adjourn, for the purpose not to return
adjourning.
to the regular meeting.
It's more or less okay.
Okay, thank you.
Here, you wanna,
No, I got this part, though, to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property where an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body,
and not to return to.
and not to return to open meeting.
And we'll take this vote by roll.
I'll
You need a
second it.
second.
Okay, so I have a second from Brooke, and we'll take this vote.
Oh,
By
Penny
roll.
Dye, aye.
Brooke
Sorry.
Moore, aye.
Yeah.
Brian Sullivan, aye.
Rima Sherry, aye.
Rita, you can vote. You can vote. Rita, aye.
Excellent.